Alright, welcome back to the Supercoach Nuff channel. Actually, don't know why I'm wearing the headphones. It's not the right computer for that. but yeah, in this video we're going to look at, I guess, some of the basics of NFL fantasy. So for those that are new to the concept and are looking for something to do during the Supercoach off season in particular, I thought, we'll spend a bit of time just talking about some of the basics. I forgot to update the season. It's the 24-25 season we're looking at. But the same sort of things apply, I hope. Otherwise, I might have to do some digital editing and magic to fix it up. But we'll get stuck into it. So when we talk about NFL fantasy, there's actually different types of games within fantasy. And generally with NFL, it is done in a draft format because the NFL itself is based on a draft format where every year teams draft, the best young talent in the country to join their teams. So because Americans are familiar with that, that's the way they play their fantasy football also. In saying that, there is a sports deck Dream Team NFL rather game, which mirrors NRL Supercoach in terms of its format. We do have a league. Got 8 teams last year. It'd be good to try and double that. But I understand some people aren't that keen on it. But it's just something to do. Fills in the time. It's a bit of fun, and get on. But in saying that, we'll talk about the different types of drafts. So probably the most common draft type is what we call a redraft draft, where basically every year you get to pick a new team. And I guess the most traditional format for that is the snake draft. So basically everyone gets a position. The first round, first player picks and goes through to the end. And then the second round, it starts with the player who picked last in the first round gets first pick in the second round. So if you've got 10 people in your league, the first player gets pick 1, but then also gets pick 20, whereas player 2 gets pick 9 and 10 as a way, 10 and 11 as a way of trying to, balance out the teams so that, the person who picks first in every round doesn't have a massive advantage. I guess a more advanced version of that is a dynasty or keeper league. And so basically this is in a situation where you've got the same group that plays every year. You might make a decision that you draft with the purpose of being able to keep a few players. So you might get to keep your 5 best players that you want to keep. Everyone else goes back into the pool and you redraft the rest of your team. Dynasty leagues, they work much like actual NFL where you draft your team and then that's your team. So every year you have the opportunity to draft in rookies, and it works like that. So some slightly more advanced sort of stuff there, particularly if you're committed to playing over multiple years. Another interesting one, and this is how I was actually introduced to NFL fantasy. I keep saying NRL, stop it. NFL fantasy is through a salary cap or auction draft. So I guess with a snake redraft, you sort of know based on your position, roughly who you can get. It's pretty formulaic. If you've got number 1, you can pick your Christian McCaffreys and everyone else has to suffer. But with salary cap, it opens it up because instead of picking a player, you nominate a player and then there's an auction based on, how much you're willing to pay out of your salary cap. So it just makes it more interesting. If you want to have, the top running back, so like say Christian McCaffrey and Justin Jefferson and Josh Allen, you certainly can, but you're probably going to have to use most of your budget to get those 3. And then you're really scraping for bargains with the rest of it. And in between, everyone's buying up the other players a bit cheaper and, it balances out that way with the budget. So yeah, salary cap's really interesting. Like I say, I do play one. If people are interested in forming a league, we can. Probably the draft is the best part of it, to be fair. But it's something different. There's also best ball leagues. So if you look at a lot of the other stuff on YouTube, like a lot of the bigger content creators, they look at best ball, which is basically where you pick a squad, but you don't have to set a team lineup every week. It automatically generates your best results. So it's slightly different in the way you pick players. You look for more upside because if they have a bad week, their score just drops out anyway. So slightly different, but again, it is a format that you may hear about. So I thought I'd talk it up. And then there's a guillotine league, which this is the one I am really keen to try. I don't really know if there's a lot of interest out there, but essentially you start with a regular draft. You can do redraft, you can do salary cap, however you want to do the actual draft. But essentially, every week, the lowest scoring player gets chopped from the league, and um, the players are then put into the free agency pool, and you can pick them up. So, if you have a bad week and your team's got, again, a Christian McCaffrey, you get chopped from the league. He becomes available for, the player who came second last that week. So, by the end of the season, those that survive have some pretty stacked teams. It'd be pretty cool to be a part of. Unless you get chopped early, then it'd be a bit flat. And then the last one, it's not necessarily a specific draft type, but just a variation of how you play with draft leagues. And that's this idea of FAB. So FAB stands for free agent budget. So generally, when you draft your team, everyone else goes in the free agency pool, and then you get to add players as you see fit. You might have an injury you need to cover, or someone that everyone missed out on might just be in really good form. But Fab puts a budget on that free agency, so sometimes there's a strategy of just churning and burning through free agents to try and maximize matchups on any given week. But obviously, if you've got a budget, you can't bring all the free agents in. So it makes you think a little bit more about that. Um, yeah, I'm a big fan of the churning and burning of free agents, but played Fab last year. It wasn't too bad. Um, it just adds that extra little dimension during the season. Excuse me. So in terms of draft scoring as well, there's a few different variations. Your standard is basically you get points for the meters that you make, so running meters, pass catching meters. You get points for touchdown, but that's really about it. You can play what's called PPR, which stands for points per reception. So you also get additional points for every catch. So even if you don't make a lot of meters, if you make a lot of catches, you can increase your points overall. So different scoring systems, which means there's different focuses. Standard usually relies on a bit more of a focus on those players that make big plays. So playing down the field and getting the big 50-meter reception. Whereas PPR, there's a bit more opportunity for what we call slot receivers. So they're the ones that sort of don't go deep down the field, but just have that short passing option. Get a few meters at a time, but generally they'll get more receptions per game. So it is important to understand your scoring format for if you're drafting, particularly wide receivers, whether they're the big deep alpha or if they're more of a slot receiver. You can have half PPR as well, so generally that's where it meets in the middle. So it sort of tries to balance out the advantages of those two different groups we just talked about. There's also drafts that are tight end premium. So tight ends usually don't get a lot of love because they don't get as many receptions as wide receivers. They often do a bit of blocking as well, which limits their upside. So in some formats, they put extra points on for tight ends that catch and score touchdowns and that sort of thing. So trying to bring the value of the tight end up to make it a bit more interesting. And you can have custom settings as well. So if you get super advanced, you can go in and make it 50 points for a touchdown or, all sorts of crazy stuff. You can rejig these formats in a lot of ways, which makes it more interesting, like in our salary cap league, for example. We have quite a deep team. I think we've got to pick about 19 players. It does mean the auction goes on for a while, but after a while, you sort of only got $1 per player, so you just quickly pick who you want and it goes through. But yeah, you can adjust it to be, bigger bench, smaller bench. You can have, we also do a bit of a silly, we call it drunk league after the main auction, which is just a snake draft, but we basically pick like three quarterbacks, four running backs, five wide receivers. There's only about six of us, so there's plenty to go around. But yeah, it's all about trying to remember who's available because we've all had a few beers by that point, and you just pick the players for the lols. So you can do all sorts of stuff with fantasy, which is one of the things I like about it. So in terms of positions, I guess the main ones are your quarterback, which is probably what everyone's familiar with. Running back, so they're the ones that are mostly associated with running the ball. They are still, in a position to catch passes from the quarterback as well. But if you get a player that does both really well, that's usually gold in NFL fantasy. Wide receivers, so they're generally the guys out wide that catch a lot of the passes. Tight ends, as we talked about just before, they're sort of hybrid between the wide receiver and the offensive line. So they can catch some passes, but they may also just sometimes be protecting the quarterback. Most fantasy leagues have a flex. So a flex is you can have like a utility, so a running back, wide receiver, or tight end. So that adds, like a little extra difficulty, a little bit of fun to the game. You can have super flex. So a super flex is like a flex, but you can also include quarterbacks. So if you have a super flex league or a double quarterback league, it suddenly makes the quarterbacks a lot more valuable because you can load up on them. You can have defense and special teams. So obviously, they don't do a lot of scoring in terms of points on the board. However, they can do things like turnovers. You can have intercepts that go for a touchdown, what they call a pick six. So yeah, defense and special teams get points for all that sort of stuff. So kick returns, interceptions, that sort of thing. Kickers you can include, and I think even in our drunk league we include a punter. Although I did pretty well last year without picking a punter out of principle. Didn't want to learn any of them and who they were. But you can get kickers that score points for kick and field goals. And then in more advanced leagues, you can have what's called individual defensive players. So, fantasy football is usually about offense, but you can include individual defensive players. So they get individual points for tackles. And so it's more about the individual rather than the team unit. Generally, you'll just have the team because that's much easier to follow than trying to pick, essentially a offensive and defensive squad. It takes a lot more of your time if you're playing individual defensive player. Excuse me. In terms of draft strategies, I guess a couple of them that you'll hear about quite regularly refer to hero and zero. So hero RB, zero RB. That's basically about this idea. Hero RB is you pick, an elite level running back, and you build your team around that. So, that's like your Christian McCaffreys, Bijan Robinson, Brees Hall. I should have a running back tier list video out. You can go and look at that. Just giving away the three S tier guys, but that's fine. So you pick one of them, and then, you just work around on what you can get. Then there's zero RB, which is where you ignore the running backs. You focus on the high end wide receivers early. And then, you pick up some running backs that, a bit lower but offer similar value than some of the guys that go before them. And then there's also Hero RB, Zero RB. So Hero RB is, again, picking an elite quarterback. They usually go in about the third round of snake redrafts. So, that's if you're grabbing a quarterback, then you're missing out on another high level running back, wide receiver. So you got to make that assessment. And then zero RB is again the opposite of that. So you sort of forget about the elite quarterbacks. You just focus on the skill positions. So running back, wide receiver, tight end, and then you get a quarterback at the end where after the sort of first few elite ones, that the difference between them usually isn't that great. So the difference between say quarterback 7 and quarterback 13, yeah, it's pretty much the same. So you just grab a quarterback whenever you can. And And then with auction and salary caps, I guess, it's similar to Supercoach. We call it guns and rookies in Supercoach, but in America they call it studs and duds or stars and scrubs. So basically, you load up in your auction with all the guns that you can. You might only be able to afford 3 or 4, depending on your budget. And then you just go with whoever we can get for $1. It's usually rookies and, you know, players that no one else really wants. And, it can work out. Um, yeah, some people like to balance their budget a bit more and have strategies about how much they pay. But yeah, again, that's up to individual preference. So, in terms of how to some common draft tips. So the first one, it seems pretty obvious, but pick the best available. So if you're in doubt, you can't decide between who to pick. They're all sort of much for muchness. Just pick the one that's seemingly the best in the sense of like, oh, I've got this strategy where I'm going zero RB, but there's still 2 of the elite running backs on the board. Just grab the elite running back. Be able to change your strategy on the fly, I guess, is what we should say there. Picking from the top of the tier, so you'll see if you do some research, a lot of fantasy experts will sort of rank players in tiers. So that's why I did the tier list this year, was sort of to try and show an example of that. And I guess that the saying is you shouldn't pick more than 4 players in the same position in a row, because if you do, you're a good chance of picking a player that's a lower tier. So you know where possible, if you're looking at you know the tier one sort of running backs are gone, you might go, okay, who are the tier one wide receivers, and go from there. Or if you look at all the tier one guys are gone, all right, well, who's the best in tier two? I'll grab them. Another one, I don't know how relevant this is this year. They're talking about the running back dead zone. And essentially, this refers to there's a bit of an awkward uh, space in the draft between your elite running backs going, and then the guys in the middle. Generally, they don't outscore the guys that go late by that much. So that's what they refer to by the running back dead zone. It's usually in redraft leagues between around rounds 3 and 6. Um, So usually then what these players will do is that's when they'll pick up their quarterback, their tight end, trying to grab, a pretty high level, again, picking from the top of the tier, to go with, a couple of wide receivers and maybe an elite running back they've already got. But again, pick the best available. It's if there's a running back that's, in a tier that's above everyone else, grab the running back. Pick for upside in late rounds, so particularly in best ball, but also I guess in your redraft leagues. You know, if you're tossing up between players, particularly in the later rounds, go for the ones that do have that upside. There's no point playing it safe. Um, they're usually going to be the players that are on your bench. So, um, you're not going to play them every week, but if you can play them in that week where they do go big, that's always a great strategy. And I guess if you are playing in a league that has kickers and defensive teams, leave them till the last 2 rounds. Some players when they're new will have a tendency to want to fill up their team. So if you've got a quarterback, running back, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, kicker and defensive team, they'll pick the kicker and defensive team in round 7 and 8, when really you should be using that time to pick your bench options. Like pick the best running back or wide receiver to really fill up the depth on your bench. So, in some draft formats, you don't even have to pick a kicker and defensive team in the draft. So, usually, what I'll do in that case is I'll just draft an extra wide receiver, running back, rookie, or whoever's available. And then, when it comes game time, if there's a player that, has got injured or something, I can flick them and just bring in a kicker or a defense at that time. You don't have to draft. Some leagues you do have to draft as part of it, but in some leagues where you can draft whoever, you can actually leave them out altogether and just pick up someone off the free agency. At the end of the day, kickers and defensive teams usually don't score anywhere near as much as the others. Um, it's just adds that extra little wrinkle to the game. And that's actually it. So I'll go back. It's a bit boring looking at the black screen. So yeah, that's the quick beginner's guide. Um, as I said, we have got a salary cap. No, sorry, not a salary cap. A redraft snake league set up if you're wanting to join. That'll be the link for that will be in the description below this video. It should be pretty casual. It's just a bit of fun. So even if you think you don't know anything about it, that's usually when people do the best. You can even auto drafting sometimes because it is so popular in America that there's a lot of time and energy put into NFL fantasy. And for that reason, there's a lot of great stuff. And, the auto drafting and stuff is pretty sophisticated. So, yeah, link in the description below. Obviously, if you've got any questions, comments, thoughts to throw out there, feel free to add them below the video. If you enjoy the NFL content, remember to give the video a like, subscribe for all the fantasy sports content on the channel. And other than that, we'll catch you in the next one.